Hey guys, welcome to a brand new video series on C++, specifically C++ for Python developers. I'm going to assume that you have a basic understanding or a decent understanding of Python, including things like classes, the way the import system works, and all of that good stuff. And from that, I'm going to try to teach you C++. Now, C++ is much harder than Python, in my opinion. Now, I think that's kind of a pretty fair assumption to make. There's a lot more features, there's a lot more going on, you have a lot more control. It's a lot less of a black box than Python and the Python interpreter is. And although there is some similarities, there's a lot more differences than there are similarities. And that's some of the things we're going to cover. The initial part of this video series is going to be mostly about showing the parallels between the two languages, where we'll have Python code sitting on one part of our screen and the C++ code on the other side, and we'll show how to do the same things you would have done in Python but in C++. But eventually we're going to hit a point where there are no parallels in Python that are even remotely similar. For example, there is no such thing as template metaprogramming, there's no such thing as pointers or move semantics or any of that advanced stuff. So for a while the videos eventually will stray away from Python, but fear not. In the end we will return to Python. Specifically, once you're proficient in C++, we're going to return back to the Python C API, and we're going to learn how Python actually works underneath, how to write C extension modules, how things like NumPy work, why they're so much faster than the built-in things that are in Python, things like that. And then once we're done with that, we can look at possibly wrapping C++ libraries or other libraries in other languages, how to wrap them so that you can use them in Python. Initially, we're going to just do this directly with the Python C API, but we could look into using libraries like PyBind and things that automate it for you. So before we jump into it, a little bit of background about myself. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, but I love programming. I've been programming since I was in middle school. Also do a fair amount of programming at my day job as a mechanical engineer. I'm also one of the core developers for DeerPyGUI, which is a Python GUI library. If you haven't used it, you should give it a shot. Other than that, the first thing we're going to do in this video series is jump right into it, and we're going to look at really the differences in compiled and interpreted languages, specifically with regards to Python and C++. So let's get into it. So to give you a basic overview of how a Python program works, you really need to consider three different aspects of it. That would be the source code, the interpreter, and the operating system. For Python, the most important part, in my opinion, is the interpreter. This is where all the magic happens. The interpreter basically acts as a virtual machine, abstracting away the platform-specific details of your target platform. Whether that be Windows, Linux, Apple, doesn't matter, your interpreter handles that for you. But that means you do have to have a different interpreter for each operating system. The interpreter for a Windows computer, which would be a .exe file, will not run on Mac or Linux, and vice versa. So basically, you need a different interpreter for every operating system. Now, we start off with your source code, which is your .py file, and when you're ready to actually run that application, you invoke the interpreter. And the interpreter, handles all the complex stuff for you. It handles the lexing, parsing, compiling, and any platform-specific details to be able to send different operations and commands to the operating system. So when you package up a Python program to distribute it, you always need the interpreter. The script by itself does nothing. Without the interpreter, it's pointless. So regardless of whether you are using something like PyInstaller or whatever other tools there are for packaging Python programs, Py2exe I believe is one too, you always need the interpreter. So that's why when you see questions about how do I turn my .py file into an executable, or why is, after they do that, the executable is so large for something as simple as maybe print hello world. The reason for that is because it had to package all of Python together for you. And Python is not small. So to compare that to the way a C++ application works, you're going to notice there's an extra step in here. And one of the other big differences, instead of an interpreter, you have a compiler, which is basically the same thing except in every way that matters. You still start off with your source code, just like before, but instead of executing on the spot what you want to run, or when you're ready to run, the compiler is used to build an executable that'll be ran at a later time. What the compiler does is takes your source code, does some pre-processing on it, compiles each CPP file into a translation unit, links all these together, and outputs your executable. And this executable is the thing that will actually run later, similar to how the interpreter for Python is the actual executable. Well, with C++, your program is the actual executable. And this is platform specific. For Windows, this would output an executable or .exe. For Mac, it's something else. For Linux, it's something else. But this will not run on Mac. So with C++, instead of having an interpreter for each target platform, you have to actually compile a different executable for each platform, which means you need a different compiler per platform. And that's really the main difference. This compiler actually will output machine-specific code. And that's also why C++ is a lot faster. There's no intermediate step whenever it's actually time to run. The analogy that I've heard people use is with Python, it's like trying to read a story in English to a German-speaking person. You would have to have a middle interpreter that would basically have to translate on the spot, which would be a lot slower than if you were to actually just write a German book and give it to a German. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the difference in how Python and C++ works, at least the final application that you create. Also, there's a little bit more to it, but we're going to get into it more as necessary. Like I said in the video, once we're getting into libraries or looking how things like that work, also, as we learn more about Python and the way it works, we'll end up expanding on the graphs that I showed you. In the next video, we're going to actually go ahead and install Visual Studio. I know some of you guys are not on Windows, but we will add a video on how to set this up for Mac and also Linux. To help with that, we're not going to be using Visual Studio's built-in build system. We're going to use CMake, which is a cross-platform build system. And that's going to do a few things. For one, it's, in my opinion, much better to use that. It's a lot more explicit. It's easier to actually see what's going on. And then, like I said, it's cross-platform. So the same thing you're seeing here, you'll be able to use on Mac, Linux, any other operating system that you have. So other than that, I will see you guys next time. If you like the video, please give us a like, subscribe. Everything helps. So, till next time.